Yo. Well, I got my block back. It's been bored and plateau honed and decked. And I got some plasma moly rings here, some YCP pistons, Yong Chang Piston Company. Funny. I kind of think these are Nippons. They're probably like the same manufacturer. That's just a guess though. They seem really nice. These are hyper-eutectic pistons. I actually like hyper-eutectic over forged for almost everything. I mean, you got to be really pounding a lot of power in a car to be thinking about forged pistons, and I'm not going to be doing that much of crazy stuff. The hyper-eutectics, they're silicone based, so they're almost as hard as a forged piston, but they don't have the expansion rate of a forged piston. So you can have really tight tolerances. I think you did like 1.5 thou or 2 thou clearance on it. For something that's under a 3-inch bore, that's pretty big for hyper-eutectic. Stock, they're probably 1/2 thou, the piston to wall clearance on these. And they're nice too because they all measure the same. They all weigh the same. So yeah, it's good high quality stuff. I really think so. So I'm going to run these instead of buying some Wiseco's or something. I got to gap these rings. I did the math on them, and I think you should have like anywhere from, you should have about 15 thousandths gap on the top ring and about 17 thousandths on the second ring. That should be about right. If I don't gap these and this ring gets too hot or hot enough, it might touch, and when that happens, a lot of times it'll break these ring lands. It can destroy pistons, wreck your block. So gapping the rings is very important. You always want more gap on the bottom than the top too. Some people say you can have them even, and it's kind of fine. Once in a while when I gap them and I screw up or something, I leave them both the same, but yeah, it's kind of okay because the top ring always expands more than the bottom ring. And the big deal is to make sure that the bottom gap is bigger than the top, because you need to think about this like an air compressor. Okay, think of the piston like the regular piston in an air compressor, and you can think of the space in between the rings as the tank for the compressor. Because when this thing's going up and down, it's gonna, a little bit of air is gonna get in between the gap, and it's gonna get in between the two rings, and it's actually gonna build up pressure in the two rings if the bottom gap isn't big enough. And then if the pressure builds up too much, it's not gonna seal the rings, and it's gonna push the rings into the piston, and it's not gonna touch the cylinders, and that's what they call ring flutter. And basically it can wash out your rings. You get fuel that runs by it, and air fuel mix that passes by it, and sooner or later it'll just wash out the rings and it doesn't seal anymore. So I gotta make sure these are gapped right. I haven't even checked them yet. And I don't know, I'm gonna make a ring gapper out of a Dremel. I don't know, I got this, it's like brown grinding wheel stuff. I don't think it's a cutoff wheel. I don't know, I bought they're in a box, like a 6-pack. It looks like a grinding wheel, and it's really fine grit. I'm just going to use a Dremel, and I got a couple of C-clamps and a book, and I think that'll be my ring gapping tool. And of course, a feeler gauge. A lot of times these holders for these grinding wheels are they're not true at all. So you get this grinding wheel to walk back and forth, and I already took a pair of pliers, and I just kept bending the shaft until it was pretty darn straight. I think this is going to work just like this. There it is. That should work. Now these are usually always marked second ring, top ring. If you're doing this job and you ever screw it up, they're not hard to figure out. The second rings are cast iron, so they look like cast iron. And plasma mollies, they'll be nice and shiny. So you know that these are the top and the oil rings. Yeah, you got to be an idiot not to know that. And I did the math. There's some numbers you got to multiply with the bore. And 15 and 16 and a half for the top, and the bottom ring is what I got. This is the max I want to go, 16 and a half to 18. This is for like drag race and oval track, and this is for street strip turbo sizes. And the factory, I put the factory maximum allowable spec on this piece of paper too. So it's 24, 28, 31. So it's 24 thousandths on the top, 28 on the second, and 31 on the oil ring. And the oil rings are usually 10 to 15. And you usually don't ever have to cut the oil rings. Almost never. So I'm going to try to keep it between the 15 and 17 thousandths on the top and the bottom. And if you ever screw these up to where maybe you cut a little too much on the top one, basically all you got to do is just pair it up with a bottom ring and just cut it and gap it a little more to make sure that the gap on the bottom is bigger. So if I do this right though, they'll all come out the same. But if I cut one that's just a little too much on the top, I'm just going to take a ring on the bottom and just cut it a little more. And just so long as I'm, well, under these numbers, it's good. But yeah, I'm going to try to stick with these numbers right here. See how good I do. And if I really screw them up, I just got to buy a new piston ring set. I'm just going to pinch these in the bore like this. I'll square this up with my piston. It's down there a good couple inches. This is the top ring. Let's start with a 14 thousandths. 14 thousandths fits. Wow. 15 thousandths fits. This is right at 16 thousandths of an inch. This is right at 16 thousandths. 0.016. So I don't need to gap these. I'm going to just check them all. Stick a 17 thousandths in here, see what happens. The 17 thousandths doesn't really fit all the way in. I'm just going to check all the top ones and then I'll check the bottom ones next. Kind of squeeze them a little bit. I don't want to wreck that beautiful plateau hone. I'm going to check a second ring, see what this one says. Wow, the second ring's actually tighter. So the second rings I'm going to have to do for sure. Yeah, 17 thousandths of an inch feeler gauge wouldn't fit in between that gap on the second ring. These are actually tighter than the tops, which is bad. I'm just going to check all these rings and get to grinding. I got one top ring I got to take about a 1 thou off of. You want to make sure you only do one side. And you want to make sure you get that thing cut as square as you possibly can. I'm just going to use a fairly slow speed and just go a little bit at a time. It doesn't take much. And usually they're not burred when you do it this way. If you feel any burrs on here, you get a really fine file. And you got to be really careful with these plasma mollies because you can chip the surface off on these. And if it chips, you're done. You got to get a new ring. But yeah, just very light pressure and just go on a downstroke and not an upstroke. That'll deburr it. It doesn't take much. I really didn't need to do that. Yeah, I got one top ring that was just a hair too tight. Okay, this one's perfect. It's at 16.5. So a 16 fits and a 17 fits about halfway in, so it's about 16.5. So these are all done. These are all at a maximum of 16.5 thou and a minimum of 15. So that's good. Now I can work on my second rings. I wanted these to be at 16.5 or 17, but since I got one of these rings, actually two of these rings are rated, they're just a hair under 17. So I'm going to want to do these second rings at 17 thousandths or bigger. These cast iron rings too, they cut a lot faster than the other ones. Okay, I got these all done. I just checked these oil control rings with a 10 thou and they all pass, so I'm done. Now I'm assembling this in my house because it's really clean here. I don't want to do this in the garage. I don't want to assemble this block in the garage. You don't want any dust blowing around. You don't want any dust anywhere. You don't want to assemble these outside with the wind blowing around. You don't want any dogs around or any kids or anything. You got to have this as clean as humanly possible. You can never have a room that's too clean, and it's always the cleaner the better. Okay, as far as these piston pins go, I already got them really clean. I can see a little bit of dust on them, probably from the box. What you want to do with these pistons, you want to make sure that they slide in and out really nice. You want to make sure they're completely dry. There's no oils on them. A lot of your pins, they put oil on them just to make sure they don't rust. You want it all clean. You want to be able to hold the pin in the piston, and you want to be able to rattle it around like this. If it doesn't fall on its own and it doesn't rattle like this, then it's too tight. Either there's dirt in here or corrosion or something, and you got to make sure that it's really clean, because if there's any little bit of speck of junk in there, this pin can lock up. So this is good. That's how it's supposed to feel right there. Even just the very small microns of dust that you can barely see, if that's in there, this piston pin isn't going to move. So that's cool. I had the machinist measure these pins to make sure they were going to be good. Same thing here. Cleaned out all the grease, and there was packing grease of some kind on these, kind of like Cosmoline in a way. But they're completely dry and completely clean. You always want to have a machinist measure these pin bores too, because a lot of times they're a little too tight. And they do that on purpose so they can hone it out to whatever piston pin you have. But Speed Factory, they had these matched up with the pins, so they're good. Okay, I got this. Now I got the little clips for these. I want to put one pin on one side, and you want to make sure you don't score the inside of the bore when you do this. So just be real gentle with it. That's cool. These things are backwards too, these YCPs, because they're for like a Suzuki Samurai or some shit. But you can tell right here that the reliefs on one side are bigger, and that's for the intake. So you want to make sure that it's on the intake side So it's actually pointing towards the crankshaft. It's backwards. And I can tell this is the intake side because I got the oil filter adapter right here. So that's got to be facing this way. And then there's tangs. The tangs that hold the bearings in place on the rods, those face the exhaust. I want to make sure them clips go all the way in. Everything spins really nice. This piston pin turns really easy. So that's good. I'm going to assemble this engine with 2050. I just went to Walmart. I went to the shampoo aisle and they got these little bottles at Walmart. They're like $1. And some people lube these pins first, but I'm not going to. I'm just going to stick a couple drips in these holes. There's some holes in the rods. These are Speed Factory extended length rods, by the way. They call them no-notch rods, so you don't have to do any block work to make this fit. And I can just put a drip on the pin. Don't need much. Just work it in there a little bit. I'm just going to turn this by hand. I can tell it's really well lubricated right now. That's all you need. You don't need to get all carried away with the thing. Just do the same thing with the other ones. This thing's a little sticky. Usually you can just wiggle them around and just move them around and hopefully it'll free up. If you can't get these to free up, you might want to take them to the machine shop and just have them touch them up on a hone. But usually you can just work them a little bit and get them to be right. There. It's amazing how just a little bit of goobers in here will make this sticky. See, that's good, just like that. I like it. Yeah, some people might tell you to use assembly lube, but I'm not real fond of it. I like motor oil. Just thick motor oil, that's all you need. Okay, those are all lubed up. Onto the piston rings. I'm going to put these oil rings on first. Here, I'm going to show you how I do this nice and close. There's the butt right there. Doesn't really matter. It's not too crucial because it's just an oil ring, but I know that the butted up portion is right here in the center of the skirt. So I'm just gonna throw one off right here in this corner. You just twist it on like this. I got the bottom ring on this corner. I got the butt right here. So I'm going to put the other one on this corner over here. So they're not going to be touching. That's good enough. You'll know it's right when it just kind of falls on its own. It's really nice and loose. It almost falls on its own. So I know that's good. Then I got the second ring, Mark's second ring. It's cast iron ring. There's numbers on here. It says 2.5 millimeter for whatever reason, and there's a bevel on the other side. But normally when anybody puts numbers on these rings, that's facing up. So you don't want to put these upside down. I got a ring expander here. Same with the top ring. There's numbers. It says 1.5 millimeter. I want that facing up. You can see there's a number on the top, so that's facing up. Just like this one. The second ring too, you can see that number. It's facing up. And I got one groove here. And then 180 degrees, I got the other groove there. So I want to take and put the second ring. See, I got a groove there. I'll put the second ring on this corner. And then I'll put the first ring on this corner. So they're 180 off. It doesn't really matter too much because these piston rings do move around. But I just do that just to do it. And that's how I do it. So I'm just going to throw the rest of these on really quick. Yeah, again, I want to make sure these rings fall on their own. And if they get a little sticky, you can just barely bend them just a little bit, whatever way they are, if you think one's up higher than the other, just to make sure they're cool. And they are so cool. That's all good. I got King Racing rod and main bearings for this. I don't want to use factory bearings because they're aluminum and they're a little soft. And these racing bearings are a little harder, so if I got any tuning issues, a little bit of spark knock or whatever, they won't get hammered as easy. If this thing runs out of tune for even like a little bit and I use them aluminum bearings, I can hammer the crap out of them real fast. I'm wearing rubber gloves, so I don't really have to worry about it too much. But if you don't have rubber gloves and you're putting these bearings together, you don't ever want to touch the bearing surface, the babbitt surface, because the oils from your hand can get in the babbitt and it can make hard spots. So always hold them on the edges and never on the bearing themselves. These rods are marked, so I can't screw them up. They all got different numbers on them, so I can't mix up the caps. You just want to slightly push on the edges and make sure it doesn't scrape off any little metal particles. Once in a while it'll scrape off some metal particles, and if it does, just get it out of there. I can see little pieces of dust, really small pieces of dust. I don't like dust. Dust is no good. No dust. This one shaved a little bit of bearing. So I just want to clean it off of here. Make sure it doesn't get crushed in between the cap. It's not much, just a little bit. I can barely see it. I have eyes of a surgeon though, so I'm really picky about this stuff. If you don't have eyes of a surgeon and you want to be as picky as me, it might help to have a magnifying glass just to make sure nothing's on these things. These rod caps came put together too. And to get them apart, I just took a mallet like this and just hammered on it like this to get them off. That way you don't wreck anything. These bolts I cleaned too, they're all dry. I haven't put any lubricant on them yet or anything. The block is out of the bag for the first time. He already cleaned this. And these cylinders are really dry. He didn't put any lube on this at all when he gave it to me, and that's good. I wanted it dry as a bone. Regardless though, I'm going to put a little brake cleaner on a rag. I got O'Reilly's brake cleaner. This stuff works really good for this. I'm just going to stick it in here and just swab this, and just to make sure there's nothing in here. Geez, such a little block. I can't even get my hand down there. There's barely anything picking up on this rag. That's good. It's going to do that with all 4 of these. This thing's so tiny. Such a tiny little engine. I got an old school ring compressor here I'm going to be using for this. There are better ones on the market, but I don't have one. Double check my rings. Make sure they're still in a good spot. Yeah, you want to be careful with this kind of piston ring compressor. I've used these so many times, though, I'm pretty confident it's going to work for me. There's not a real big chamfer on the top of these cylinders. In fact, I don't think he chamfered it at all either, so I got to be really careful. I leave all of these dry, and I get it so it's almost at the, I don't know, I probably got it about a 1/4 inch from the oil ring, so the skirt's exposed. And I want to take my 20W50 and I just want to lightly coat the skirts. Just like a drip or two. Looks like 2 drips ought to do it. I just want to coat them just real light. I see people soaking pistons, and that's a big no-no. You just need enough on the skirts. You want to keep the piston rings dry. They're supposed to seal dry forever. And the cylinders I leave dry. So the only thing that needs to be lubed is the skirts, because that's the only thing that's going to be going up and down that needs lubrication. So you don't need to get carried away. I just want to double check my tang. Make sure the tang's facing the exhaust. Make sure my arrow's pointing to the rear. Stick this thing down in here. And I just want to lightly tap on this. I want to square this up. Make sure this stupid thing is nice and square. And I just want to gently tap this down. If I feel it stop, it's wrong. And I don't want to hammer it in like really hard, because if I do, and that piston doesn't want to go in, then I got to take it back out. I don't want to wreck them rings. So I want to just put them all in so they're almost top dead center, just like this. They're probably about, I don't know, a 1/2 inch down. I can feel that rod right here. That's where I want it. They're in. Well, I think that's enough for one video for the day. I'll start on another one a little later on. I'm sure there's going to be at least one of you, like the barn stayings guy, going to ask me 20 questions about the stuff on my desk. Well, tell you right now, I like to have some cool stuff to look at when I'm sitting at my desk and doing my work. So before you go asking the $1 million questions, all I gotta say is, what kind of boring ass crap do you have on your desk? Okay, bye.